Well, I've talked about 2 of the 3 original railway engines. I've got to complete the trilogy, right? This is Henry the Green Engine. Henry is the number 3 engine on the island of Sodor. He is one of the biggest engines on the railway. He usually is seen pulling heavy goods trains across the island to the mainland, including a special fish train called the Flying Kipper, but he can also be seen pulling passengers. He's stubborn, grumpy, and rude, but he's also the kindest of the big 3 engines, and when he's by himself in a place he loves the most, he feels peace. He's also a huge scaredy cat. Chicken pie! So why is Henry the most tragic character of Thomas? Well, the answer is quite simple. Henry had the most complex arc of the Railway series. Gordon's arc was very gradual, but Henry's is a lot more complex. Okay, so in terms of backstory, you have to understand the context of the first 4 Railway series books, written by series creator Wilbur Awdry. When he wrote his very first book, The 3 Railway Engines, he had 3 specific engines in mind that he thought best fitted each character. A K2 class 440 tender engine for Edward, the most outdated engine at the time, an LNER A1 class 462 tender engine for Gordon, the most modern and high-speed engine at the time, and a 442 Atlantic class for Henry, a more contemporary type of locomotive. 3 very different engines, with Henry being the sort of medium between the old and new. Awdry's original illustrations for Henry depict him as a 442 Atlantic. To make a long story short, so you don't have to listen to me ramble about this for an hour, the illustrations for the first 4 books could not get Henry right. He was illustrated as a mix between a 460 and the Atlantic class Awdry wanted him to be. Awdry pretty famously hated Henry because of this, and wanted to write a story where he became ill and took his leave forever. This is why Henry is seen sick in Thomas the Tank Engine and Tank Engine Thomas again. However, as more kids and readers started asking him for more Henry, he decided to stick with what he had and give him a backstory to explain his awkward appearance. So, here it is. In 1919, an unknown locomotive builder stole drawings from Sir Nigel Gresley. Gresley was a famous locomotive designer who designed very famous engines such as the A4 Pacifics and the A1 Pacifics we talked about earlier. This unknown builder held a grudge against Gresley, so he sent a spy to steal some of his drawings, who did manage to get hold drawings of a steam engine of which the thief had built. But what he didn't realize was that the drawings he had stolen were actually for an experimental locomotive. These drawings included a flawed design for a type of engine that wasn't ready for production yet. But by the time he realized this, the engine was already built, and the result was Henry the Green Engine. Henry had a lot of mechanical issues, and this caused him to be an unreliable steamer. He was a flawed Pacific with a very tiny firebox that didn't produce the level of heat it should have. The locomotive designer needed someone to buy Henry, and that chance came along when he met Sir Topham Hatt, the current director of the railway. Topham was in need for engines on his railway, and so he bought Henry, and became furious when he arrived. It went a little something like this.
I wanted an Atlantic, and that son of a sent me that! What the fuck?
All this changed when Henry finally received his book, Henry the Green Engine. In the first story, Sir Topham Hatt decided to put an end to Henry's steaming troubles, and brought in some special Welsh coal, which burned better and produced more steam, and Henry finally worked properly. But all that changed late one night when Henry was tasked to pull a special fish train to the mainland, a special delivery called the Flying Kipper. En route, ice freezed a set of points that sent Henry down the wrong line and crashing into a goods train. He is severely damaged from the accident, so Topham sent Henry to Crewe to be completely re-overhauled. A year passes and Henry returns to Sodor, now in a completely different shape. He was changed to a Black 5 tender locomotive. He finally worked 100% properly, and was here to stay permanently on the island of Sodor. Okay, that's Henry's backstory. It's extremely convoluted and messy, but it works really well because it makes Henry a very sympathetic character, with a streak of sadness to him. This is a great segue into his character. I would describe Henry in the book series as stubborn and arrogant. He's one of the titular big engines, and is just as rude and disrespectful as Gordon and James. He gets shut up in a tunnel for not wanting to take his passenger train in the rain. He goes on strike because he doesn't want to shun coaches. He thinks he's the only engine proper enough to pull the royal train. He joins Gordon in making fun of Edward multiple times. He joined the others in bullying Duck, Donald, and Douglas when they first arrived. He believed he deserved 2 tenders like Flying Scotsman, etc., etc. Very rarely do we get to see his kind side of his personality that would really be pushed in the TV series. I think Henry's backstory, coupled with his standoffish behavior, go hand in hand in terms of his personality. Despite being a very hard-working engine now, his unfortunate past can cause him to become self-conscious and, on multiple occasions, rude when he thinks his image is being put down upon. He's had such a hard life, and so he thinks he deserves better than others. When taking his backstory into account, it becomes pretty understandable why Henry is always seen as a jerk. The same can be said for the majority of the classic series too. Henry is usually shown to be rude and selfish like Gordon and James half the time, especially in season 5.
Pah! You're late, and that smell is making me ill.
It's the fish, replied Thomas, and there's danger on the rails. That's why we're late.
Ha! You're the only danger on the rails, Thomas. Now stop wasting time and get your cars hitched to my train. Owls, mists, ghosts. Edward's going soft at the boiler. Stupid bird.
That's not to say this was his personality throughout the entirety of the show. I personally think the TV series made Henry a lot more layered in the books. Season 3 in particular was the big game changer for the show, where they started writing more original stories and delving deeper into the characters' personalities. This is where James's pride of his red paintwork comes into play, Duck's love for the sea, etc. Henry was no exception, and I'm of course talking about the episode Henry's Forest. This episode showed a more gentler side of Henry, in which he loves nature. The forest on the main line is his favorite place to visit, and it gives Henry a sense of peace and serenity. He loves the forest so much that he became extremely disappointed when it was damaged by a bad storm, and did everything he could to try and save it. Audrey pretty famously hated this episode, because he thought it was too unrealistic and broke real railway practice.
Well, what responsible driver would stop as if he was in a roadside lay-by? They showed a lamentable ignorance of Rule 55.
Do you feel that those television programs are still your work?
No.
I can kind of understand why he feels this way. I mean, Henry is his character, but I respectfully disagree. This is a really strong character episode, and it shows that on the inside of that self-important hothead behavior is a gentle, kind heart. Dude, I love Season 3 so much. The later model seasons would play with this personality trait a lot more, and I'm very happy they stay consistent with that. The CGI series...
Henry! What on earth are you doing?
I mean, it does add something to his character, being a big ol' scaredy cat now, but it's absolutely not how I picture Henry acting at all. The TV series also liked playing around with Henry's dynamic with Gordon, pairing them both in several stories, which are all bangers. Season 10 gave us 2 Henry and Gordon episodes. In one, Henry comes out on top, and Gordon pulls through in the other. Season 20's Henry Gets the Express is one of the few episodes of the whole CGI series where Henry isn't portrayed like this. It showed Henry as a pretty big badass, giving Gordon a run for his money when he got to pull the Express. These two really make a fun duo together. The same can be said for his dynamic with James. In Chris's books, Henry remains relatively the same cocky bully self, but what I really love that Chris played around with a lot is his relationship with James. The biggest example of this is in the book Henry and the Express, where we get to see the two play off of each other a lot. I think it was very fitting pairing 2 of the most self-important characters of the series together. It makes for a lot of fun stories. Wilbert's final Henry story in the Railway series was Super Rescue, which is undeniably one of the best stories in the series by far. In this story, Henry rescues a broken down diesel in his train, only for another diesel to break down on his line, and he has to rescue them both at the same time. It's such an awesome story, and a great showcase of how far Henry has come since his arrival, becoming one of the biggest badasses of the series that you really root for. A true poetic finale for a character who had the most rockiest start to his career, now at a point where he comes out on top as a Chad. And as the last Henry story written by Wilbert, I don't think he could have ended his journey any better. Henry really went through a lot over the course of the franchise, from rude and pompous to super Chad to nature lover to worried and petrified. Henry has been on quite the journey. All of these elements combined form one of the most complex, well-written, layered characters of the whole Thomas and Friends series. And that is why I consider Henry the Green Engine to be the most tragic character of Thomas and Friends.